Good evening. We are just about ready to begin. Oh, all right. This is AstroDynamics number 39. Now, if you've been following these talks, you can see that they are definitely not linear. One thing does not follow after another. Some of that is due to the fact that the material jumps around and that we're trying to cover a number of different things and bring them together. And sometimes it is because I choose to do things in a peculiar way. Now, this evening is going to be another jump, major jump. First, let's try to regain focus as much as we can, which means a little tiny review, which will probably not be like the original was in the first place. AstroDynamics is the study of how things change in time using astrology. We have been looking at changes in life for people, and we have been looking at changes relative to horoscopes. More or less, we have been following what might be called a funnel approach. The funnel is very broad at the lip, and gradually it tapers down to the spout where it is relatively small. As material flows down the spout, it becomes more centered and more concentrated, and there's usually more pressure. And the material is focused where it is wanted to be focused. If you're putting gasoline in your automobile, you want it to go down right down the tube. So that's where the focus is. Now, at the rim, the function is capturing as much as can be captured from as wide of an area as possible. And at the spout, the purpose is focus, putting things where you want to be. So what we've been trying to do in AstroDynamics is start at the lip of the funnel and look at very broad things and then gradually work our way down to little things, which we hope will be the astrology of events. Now, with astrology, the funnel is not the same as the funnel that we pour gasoline down, because there's not a symmetry as there is in a simple funnel. And the astrological funnel may have several spouts, some of which may be active at some times and some at others. So what we're trying to do is not just as simple as using a funnel. All right, in review, the first thing that we looked at were sectors of life. We tried to see what the first half of life was like relative to the second half of life. One is you're on the upswing, and on the other you're on the downswing, at least as far as physical things are concerned. We noted that there were also quarters of life or thirds of life, that we could divide life into three parts, relatively speaking, like 30, 60, and 90 years would be the 3/3 of life. And the quarters would again be around 20 years or something like that. So that's the first thing we looked at, was sectors. Now, we looked at traditional values for sectors, like what are the values of the first half versus the second half in the same thing. And we gave traditional rulers, like the second half is very much Saturn, and the first half is very much Mars. Mars is youthful and vigorous, and Saturn is cautious and limiting. Now, when we looked at quarters and thirds of life, we weren't so careful about abstract rulers. And the next thing that we did after that was to take astrological cycles which approximate the sectors of life. Like, for example, looking at life in halves, we used the Uranus cycle. The Uranus cycle is 83 years approximately. This means that the first half of life is from the position of Uranus at birth until it becomes opposite its position, which is famous among astrologers as the midlife crisis. For the thirds of life, one of the things we use, there are quite a few that you can use for thirds, but we use the Saturn cycle. That's the classic that most people use. We could have used the progressed moon cycle, and we could have used some things using a Neptune and Uranus. We did that all at that time when we looked at those things. And when we looked at the quarters of life of approximately 20 years, we looked at the Saturn-Jupiter cycle, which takes about 20 years for a cycle to be completed. And we weren't very original in that. I believe it was Toynbee, the great historian, that broke all of history in the Western world down into 20-year sectors, and he used the conjunctions of Saturn and Jupiter to do that. That's in case any of you want to do some research to see what other people have done, or do something on your own. All right. We learned that there's much more astrological traction when we use things like the Saturn-Jupiter cycle or the unary Saturn cycle coming home to its natal position, and same with Uranus. There's much more to that than to the abstract rulers of the sectors of life. Next, we studied purely astrological methods for determining periods, astrological and life periods. We used the standard things that all astrologers use. And we began with transits. Transits are the relationships of the planets in the heavens to the natal horoscope. The reason we started with transits, which for most astrologers is not a good way to work, we started because it's the most popular. Almost every astrologer is familiar with transits. And with transits, we worked with the planets from Jupiter out to Pluto. And the reason we used only the outer planets is because they move slowly enough so that if there is a transiting aspect to a natal planet, that it hangs on long enough to have an effect. doing there, we worked only with transiting conjunctions to natal planets and oppositions to natal planets. And when we discussed transits, to use examples, we used, all right, I think we're, uh-oh. Sorry about that. I accidentally bumped the controller for the camera. All right. And when we work with transits, we work with my horoscope. And not because I'm an egoist. I certainly am an egoist. I guess all of us have a lot of ego involved. But we use my horoscope because it's the one I'm most familiar with. And I certainly encourage that when you study these things, you work with your own horoscope. Your horoscope is your life. Is your life, and you're here to do certain things and learn certain things, and therefore you want to work with your own horoscope. Another reason for using my own horoscope is because it's the one that I'm most familiar with. And yet a third reason for using my own horoscope is that it is almost as if my life was designed to show how the transits work. So that's what we did. And we also, when working with transits, looked at the transits at the inaugurations of all of the presidents under which I have lived. And we tried to determine what transits were were active at the time of the inaugurations. And we came up with not so good results. And we didn't find a high degree of significance. And from that, we had several options to interpret what we had gone through. We could say that transits don't work, but almost every astrologer who has worked with transits know that there are transits and that they do work. Or it may be that the inaugurations in terms of character development, which is what astrology is all about, the inauguration was not an important thing in their life. Perhaps other things in life were more important. Or there may be something that we didn't think about. But at any rate, we worked with transits. Somewhere in there, my friend Rick gave us a very technical introduction to primary directions. It was super technical, and it brought in many things that a lot of people will not experience in their astrological careers if they study all of their life, because Rick has done very well in understanding the mathematical basis of primary directions and other things. I think that section was important in order for one to realize that technical astrology is not simple. And this is not something like this is your sun sign or something like that. The next thing we did is we looked at secondary progressions. And secondary progressions, mystics claim that they have to do with a higher world, looking at the birth from a higher world. But the formula for secondary progressions are each day after birth represents 1 year. And usually for secondary progressions, one uses the inner planets, Sun, Venus, Mercury, Moon, and Mars. On rare occasions, you work with Jupiter and Saturn. I work today with a horoscope that had very important primary directions to Jupiter and Saturn. The person was older, retirement age, and so that things had moved into a significant position. I found it extremely interesting, but that's neither here nor there. But we worked with inner planet progressions. Astrologers find usually that the progressions of the sun are usually more important than all of the other progressions. We again looked at the secondary progressions in my own horoscope. And again, they were amazingly accurate, and it was interesting to see the interplay between the transits and the progressions when they were active at the same time, and the kinds of events and the kind of period I was going through at any given time. All right, and then we went back to the presidents and the presidential inaugurations. We looked at what secondary progressions were active in the inaugurations of those same presidents. And again, we didn't find much. We found very little, as a matter of fact. And this again caused us to question things. Is this because the inauguration is not as important as the character development that led to it, or the kinds of events that brought a person to be able to run for president? Those things might be more important. Or we could say that secondary progressions don't work, which most experienced astrologers find do work, or there's again some other explanation that we don't know anything about. So we again returned to we again turned to primary directions. I don't want to get too far away from my notes here. Oh yes. We then did a little poor man's study of primary directions. And by a poor man's study means that we did not do all kinds of mathematics. Now, it is a fact that the midheaven is the most known part of the horoscope. The ascendant is the next most known, but the calculation of the ascendant depends on what kind of horizon you're using and things like that. But the thing about the midheaven is that the midheaven moves 1 degree every 4 minutes. So if at 8 minutes after birth, it would be the midheaven would have moved 2 degrees. Now, if you don't move and you stay fairly close to where you were born, you can use the table of houses. And the table of houses will give you the positions of the cusps after birth every 4 minutes. And that's a poor man's way of primary directions. Now, in my case, it turns out that most of my life, with a few exceptions when I lived in Arizona and California, a little bit New York, but most of my life was spent at very near to where I was born. And so when we looked at the primary directions in my horoscope, they proved to be quite accurate. And they proved to be quite accurate, especially in matters of predicting events with health, like accidents or periods of illness or things like that. It turned out to be very accurate. And this goes along with astrologers who do the very technical primary directions. It goes along with what they find. But that's only a poor man's way. If you want something really accurate and you want to be able to predict down to the day and the place, you have to do something more than that. We did this rough way of doing things just to demonstrate the accuracy of it. Next, we started working our way toward the spout of the funnel. And we wanted to look at smaller periods of time. You know, if something is in the second half of life, but it's in a period where such and such is accurate, that gives you a smaller focus until you finally get down to the day when something happens. That's our goal. That's what we're trying to do at this point. We started looking at something that's basic to all astrology and that we're going to do a lot more of this evening. We started looking at cycles, and we looked at the lunation cycle, which is a cycle that takes approximately 28 days. And we looked at the phases of the moon, and we looked at the kinds of qualities that are in a waxing moon, a waning moon, and what happens at the quarters and things like that. We did that because we're going to want to find out what kind of a month it was and what time in the lunation cycle an event takes place. And so that's what we did in our way of moving more toward the spout of the funnel. We also did a little bit talking about new moons and eclipses, but not a lot of that, and we're going to come back to that. There's going to be much more of it before we get done, if I'm still alive yet when we get that far. We're going exceedingly slow. And then we were about to proceed down toward the spout of the funnel even more, but I was unhappy with what we had done with the presidents. So what we did is we spent several sessions going back to the presidential charts. But instead of choosing the inaugurations, we chose moments that were important in their life, like an impeachment or a major automobile accident or something like that. And we did that. We chose one major event, like for Harry Truman, the dropping of the atomic bomb. And we looked at that, and when we did this with all of the president's charts, we were much more successful, which gives us an idea of what astrology is all about. Astrology is about the events that produce character, the astronomical events that produce character events in life events that are significant for changing a person's consciousness and character. That was a leap that we took to go back to the presidents. And now, right now, beginning this evening, we are about to take another leap. And this will be a very big leap in several ways. Eventually, we will jump back to looking at sectors of life in a different way. But before that, we do that, we have to introduce a few things. First, we have to introduce a totally different kind of astrology. Now, the astrology that we've been studying is direct in that it relates to the stars and the planets and their orientation to the Earth at the time of birth. Now, some of the techniques that we used are based on abstractions, but they can be, even the abstract things can be traced back to the heavens. That is what almost all astrologers do nowadays. Mystics have another option, and we're going to talk about a mystical option that is a different kind of astrology. This astrology that we have been looking at is the relationship to the stars and planets in the sky. Some of them are abstract, some are not. Now, the mystical kind of astrology looks at astrology in a very different way. For example, there was a famous mystical Neoplatonist called Porphyry. And Porphyry, in one of his, I believe it was his treatise on the Cave of the Nymphs, which he relates to solstices and equinoxes, if I remember right, but that's a long time ago for me, so I don't want to be quoted on that. But Porphyry said there were zodiacs before there were stars. That's a significant statement. There were zodiacs before there were stars. Now, the same thing that he said could be said of all of the things that we use in astrology. For example, there was a Saturn principle, or a spiritual principle symbolized by Saturn, before there was the planet Saturn. The quality or the principle deep in spirit existed before much later it was manifest in the physical planet, which was its embodiment, as you might say, almost its epitome. Now, because these principles have creative powers, the study of the application of these powers forms a kind of astrology. It's a different kind of astrology from the kind that we have been studying, but it is real. Now, for the past several years, in the philosophy talks, which alternate with these talks on astrology, we have been discussing first cosmology and now cosmogony. Cosmology is how things get done in a creation, and cosmogony is about the creation itself, how it is brought about. Now, in both cosmogony and cosmology, and for astrology for that matter, the central tool for understanding is the cycle. Now, we've looked, as just mentioned a few minutes ago, we have looked at the cycle of sun and moon. We'll return to that and to other cycles in the future. For now, we want to discuss cycles in cosmogony. While the cycle is the tool used in cosmogony, the principles that are the expressions are they're the materials of cosmogony. So, the study of cosmogony is the study of the cyclical application of principles that are now symbolized by planets, or now represented by planets. And they are more than mere ideas. They are creative powers. So we're talking here about the gods. Now, there are other principles that are involved in the creation of a universe, such as our solar creation, but that's way too much for this kind of a talk. It gets very, very complicated. Even the little bit that we're doing in the cosmogony talks is quite complicated. Now, when speaking of cosmogony in those talks, we have talked about 7 great creative periods of time. And they are the Saturn period, the Sun period, the Moon period, the Earth period, the Jupiter period, the Venus period, and the Vulcan period. Now, because Vulcan is beyond our current comprehension, it is usually, when talking about cosmogonical cycles, it is usually left out. In its stead, the Earth period is divided into two, because in the Earth period, half of it is spent going into deeper concretion and materialization, and half of it is coming out of materialization. So the first half is associated with Mars, and the second half is associated with Venus. So this gives us a slightly different sequence than that with Pluto. And this sequence is Saturn, Sun, Moon, Mars, Mercury, Jupiter, Venus. That's the cycle that we're going to be talking about now for a few minutes. Now, in each of the 7 periods, the periods relate to time and to spirit. In each of these 7 periods, there are 7 globes, which relate to matter, or they relate to space. And these globes are given the names A, B, C, D, E, F, G. It's almost childish. The reason it is done that way is because the really names for the 7 globes in each period should be Saturn, Sun, Moon, Earth, Jupiter, Venus, Vulcan. But when you're talking about globes in space, too many people confuse them with the heavenly bodies like Saturn and the Sun and things like that. So they are those names are not used for the globes, even though they should be, and I would think that by now people should be able to have a clear enough consciousness to use those names for the globes without having to use the ABCs. In each period, there are 7 revolutions of consciousness through the 7 globes into materialization and out. So there are revolutions of consciousness, sort of like when we direct our attention to this and then we direct it to something else. And these are given the same names. The Saturn revolution, the Sun revolution, the Moon revolution, the Earth, and so on. And for practicality, the Vulcan is left out, and the Mars-Mercury is inserted instead, because for all practical purposes it works well. Thus, whether we're dealing with periods, whether we're dealing with globes, or whether we're dealing with revolutions of consciousness, we're working with the following sequence: Saturn, Sun, Moon, Mars, Mercury, Jupiter, Venus. Now, bear with this. This is long and tedious. We're getting to something practical and something that can be used every day. But to get there, we have to have a totally different understanding of the cosmos, other than the astrology that we have now, dealing with just the heavenly bodies. Now, this sequence that is common to the days, or the periods, and the globes and the revolutions is familiar to us, very familiar to us. It is the sequence of the days of the week. Saturday is Saturn's day, Sunday is the Sun's day, Monday is the Moon's day, Tyr's Tag Tyre was the Norse and German Mars, but in the Latin countries, Tuesday is called Martes, relating it directly to Mars. Then we have Wednesday, Wotenstag, and Woten is the Norse and German Mercury. And like in Spanish, Wednesday is Miércoles. And Thursday is Thor's day, and Thor was Jupiter. And Jupiter, like in Spanish, is Jueves. So in our societies, all of the days of the week are named after the planets, and they're in this order. Now, this is important in that it says the sectors of time have quality. Each sector has its own quality. And a day is a sector of time. And we're saying that each day, according to its day ruler, has a quality to it. And this is the same, like the idea that we get, for example, in studying physics is that every minute is the same as every other minute. There is no flavoring to time. And that's not what mysticism and astrology finds. Now, the flavoring is something that you can personally verify for yourself. It's not something simple, but it can be verified first by using sensitivity. You can be sensitive to the feel of each day. But your sensitivity has to be trained. It has to be trained so that you feel flavor and that you know the flavors of the planets so that you can recognize them in the days of the week. And to have that kind of sensitivity, it involves having a purification of personal bias. You don't want to hate Saturn's Day or something like that. In order to use sensitivity as a vehicle of gaining viable knowledge, you have to be purified. And the more purified you are, the more sensitive you really are. You can't deal in wishes. We're trying to deal with factual realities. Now, there is a problem in this, and any goal of science, it can't be done, it can be done in a number of ways. We can come to the information we want to get to in a number of ways. For instance, one can feel the difference of the days. This is what you were trying to reach out for. Does a Monday, which for most people is wash day, when the laundry is done, that certainly fits with the moon, does that feel different from a Tuesday or a Wednesday? And this requires a very highly developed sensitivity. And there are problems with that kind of sensitivity, even if there are no personal biases. Because today, when this talk is being recorded, it is a Wednesday. It is, therefore, a Mercury day. But at the same time, something is going on in the heavens. And when something is going on in the heavens, it also has an influence. So not only must one have a keen sensitivity and astrologically trained sensitivity, and there has to be a discrimination so that you can tell whether the influence you're feeling is from the quality of the day or whether it is from the transiting positions of the planets. So it's a very specialized kind of sensitivity. Now, I have a friend who claims that he can always tell that it's Sunday. He claims that it's Sunday because the light in the air, at least where he lives and he's familiar with it, is brighter on Sunday than it is on other days. Now, when we think about it, most of us are pretty crude and insensitive when compared to something like that. We have a long road ahead of us in terms of developing sensitivity. Now, sensitivity without training can become a curse instead of a blessing. Because if one puts too much effort into developing sensitivity, one becomes passive. And one's life becomes a curse. This is why it has to be controlled and trained sensitivity, or you become the plaything of entities and things like that. And you have to know what it means. You have to know to be careful on a Saturn's day, because people are more likely to be depressed or take things negatively. So knowledge is important. Plus, you have to have the will. What we're talking about is something that I've talked about many times in philosophy talks and in astrology talks, that there is a trinity of qualities that are necessary to function healthfully in life. And that trinity is sensitivity, knowledge, and will. At times, one chooses one over the other because it's more important. At times, sometimes the will is all important and one puts everything one has into willful assertions. You have to gut things out once in a while. If you're too sensitive, you become timid. If you have knowledge and you focus too much on knowledge, you become irrelevant. You become like a pedant scholar or something like that, who can relate all kinds of knowledge about planetary hours even. But it's relevant because the knowledge isn't in touch with sensitivity and it isn't used to act on things. Now, if somebody doesn't have the sensitivity to verify the qualities of the day of the week, there are other things that can be done. You can keep records. You can keep records of the kinds of things that occur on the given days of the week. It's a simple thing. If you're working with if you keep a journal, or if you have a if you keep a daily diary, it's something that you can add in there. These kinds of things happen today, and if you look back over your journal year by year, you'll find, oh, those are things that indicate that, yeah, this was indeed a Mars day or a Jupiter day. That's all fine, but I'm not really too keen on that, because it's knowledge-based, and the knowledge is very sparse. And astrology is not simple. It's pretty complicated. As we've just seen, there are many layers to any given moment. You're in a given phase of the moon. There are transits taking place, and there are planetary days. All of these things are present in a moment. And put together, they give an exact flavor of any given moment. But one has to know all of the factors and which ones are more important than others. And that's obviously not a simple thing to do, because you have to know what is more significant than what. Relative significance is the basis of all good astrology. You have to know what is more important, what is more relatively significant. Not what you're more familiar with, or not which catches your fantasy at or your fancy at the moment, but what is more significant. In these matters, these are scientific matters. I prefer sensitivity coupled with intuition. That is the best way to determine these things and understand the truth of these things. My teacher believed in knowledge and sensitivity. Even though he had clairvoyance, and it was developed well enough so that he could see astrological influences, he still preferred knowledge and intuition as a means to come to conclusions that he could act on. All right. Well, the timing of this is going very well. So what happens if we don't have clairvoyance or sensitivity? How do we know if we have the correct planetary qualities for the given days? In our ignorance, as things stand now, we have to trust authority, which is always a scary thing for an independent thinker, but sometimes we have to trust authority. And choosing authorities that are faithful, reliable, and have integrity. Now, the days of the week go way back into history, and the assignation of the planetary rulers to the days of the week hasn't changed over thousands of years. So therefore, it's probably likely to be valid as it is. But some people have kept records. Probably the best example of these records is with the Jews. The Jews have been extremely scrupulous about keeping the Sabbath. And the Sabbath is Saturn's day. So if we take what is given to us by history, the planetary rulers of the days, we can work with that. It would be nice if we had the ability to sensitively perceive it, but until then we can work with it and it can be useful. We can see that it's valuable either way. All right. Now this other astrology that we're briefly looking at is called revolutionary astrology because cycles follow cycles. Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and then you start all over again with Saturn. And this kind of cycle is sometimes called a Chaldean or Chaldean revolutionary cycle. Now, as we have said, it's based on the cosmogony of the creation, which surprisingly is pretty agreeable to all present mystic cosmographies. Cosmogonies, sorry. However, at present, we are in quarantine here on Earth. We feel emotions, so we're connected to the desire world, and we think, so we're connected to the world of thought. But most of our consciousness, where we are awake here in the physical world, and we're quarantined from clairvoyant and spiritual vision of the higher worlds. So, here in the world that we are in, we do have the planets. And astronomy does a very good job of keeping track of the motions and all sorts of minutiae about the different planets. So what we want to do is understand if there is a relationship between the planets that we see in the heavens and the cosmogonic, the days of the week cycle that we have been talking about for the past few minutes. And there are several ways that the two systems, astronomy and mystical cosmogony, are tied together. And we're going to do that by looking at the Ptolemaic or Chaldean order. The way astronomy looks at things these days is heliocentric. We have the sun, and then we have Mercury going around it, and then Venus, and then Earth, and then Mars, and then the asteroids, and then Jupiter, and going all the way out to Pluto, even beyond that to Eris and some other planets or planetoids. But the solar system can be described in a different way. And it is described in an order that is called the Ptolemaic order or the Chaldean order. It is geocentric. It is Earth-oriented. Now, you can calculate the positions of the planets, especially the basic planets, Sun through Saturn. You can calculate them using Ptolemaic astronomy. In fact, that has been done. Computer scientists a few years ago took up the challenge, and they made an ephemeris based on Ptolemaic methods. They had to develop new correction tables, or what they would call epicycles on epicycles, but they were able to do that. In fact, computer scientists have used other numeric methods to predict the positions of planets. It's sort of a thing that for a while that was sort of a fad, I guess, among computer scientists. Now, the Ptolemaic order, or its description of the solar system, is geocentric. And it's based on the apparent speed of the planets relative to the Earth. The moon goes 13 degrees a day, so it's obviously the first step in the Ptolemaic system. Now, both Venus and Mercury go more than a degree a day, but on average, Mercury goes more than a degree, more than Venus does. So the next step is Venus. Next step is Moon, Mercury, Venus. The Sun goes a degree a day, and then Mars goes a degree every 2 days, and then you have Jupiter and Saturn, which are much slower. So that is the Ptolemaic order. The Ptolemaic order is Moon, Mercury, Venus, Sun, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn. It's the same 7 planets that we're using in the days of the week cycle. But the statement of the Ptolemaic order is usually made in a different way. I don't know why it is made, but it's Sun, Venus, Mercury, Moon, Saturn, Jupiter, Mars. It's the same as we derived it. It's just that the Sun is put first. Now, so it's based on, this order is based on descent of energy from the Sun to the Earth. So that is to say, the energy from the Sun goes first to Mercury, and then it goes to, it goes first to Venus, then Mercury, then Moon, and then the Saturn is at the other end. All right, I don't want to get into that. Now, what we're trying to do is we want to see how the Ptolemaic order, which is based on Ptolemaic astronomy, which is geocentric, how that fits in with the days of the week. So we have 2 orders that we want to put together. The Ptolemaic is Sun, Venus, Mercury, Moon, Saturn, Jupiter, Mars. The days of the week, which we are familiar with again and again: Saturn, Sun, Moon, Mars, Mercury, Jupiter, Venus. They're very different from each other. I can't give a complete explanation of why, but I can show you how they're tied together. And that is based on something similar to what we've been talking about. And that is that the hours of the day also have planetary qualities. And they too can be verified by the same tools, sensitivity or observation and recording and things like that. But since we've already gone into those things, we don't have to repeat that. We understand what we need to do to become mystical scientists and apply our sensitivities or our capacities to understand things. Now, planetary hours are not like railroad hours. The hours that we use now are all 60 minutes in length, and they are 60 solar minutes in length and not 60 sidereal minutes in length, but we won't go into that because that's just a matter of something a little different. So they're called railroad hours because they were standardized so that each time zone, everyone had the same hours. And that everything was 60 minutes, and then we could have the clocks and everything that we have now. Now, the planetary hours depend on the time of the year and the time and the location on the Earth. So it's time of day, time of year, and location on the Earth. Now, in planetary hours, they are different from the day and the night. We're talking about a whole different system here that was developed by sensitivity thousands of years ago. In summertime, here in Wisconsin where this is being recorded, the days are longer than the nights. And in wintertime, the nights are longer than the days. In the tropics, and especially on the equator, they're pretty close to the same all the time. Not exactly. So a day hour is 1/12 of the time from sunrise to sunset. And a night hour is 1/12 of the time from sunset back to sunrise. And so obviously, planetary hours vary according to the time of the year and where you're located. They're opposite almost in the southern hemisphere. And in the Arctic, where a day takes 6 months, the hours are distended to being 2 weeks. So the planetary hours are very different in that kind of circumstance. All right. Now, in revolutionary astrology, since it's based on the Earth, the day begins at sunrise. And the ruler of the first hour of the day is the planet that rules the first hour. So the planetary day ruler is the ruler of the planet first hour. For example, today has been a Wednesday, and so the first hour, from the moment the sun rose, the first hour, which is 1/12 of the time from sunrise to sunset, was ruled by Mercury. The next one was by Moon and such like that. It follows the same cycle. Now, the first hour of the day is most important, obviously, since the whole day is defined by the first hour. It's like the way you start. The first first motion that you make or the first action that you take determines everything that follows therefrom. So the first hour of the day is the most important, even though you cycle through all of the 7 planetary qualities. Now, the hours after the first hour follow the Ptolemaic system. So if the first one was Mercury, the next one will be Moon, Saturn, Jupiter, Mars, Sun, Venus, and then they cycle through again. Now, if you do that and take all 7 and cycle through the hours, through the 24 hours, the 12 day hours and the 12 night hours, you will have 3 left over, which means that the 3rd planet from Mercury will be the planet that is the first hour in the next day. And so the 3rd planet from Mercury is Jupiter. So tomorrow will be Thursday, Thor's day, and it will be a Jupiter day. Okay. Now, we can see here that the world that we live in, which is a 3-dimensional world in which we treat very pragmatically, even though it's illusory relative to the total reality, of things, is tied together with the cosmogony and the cycles of creation. Now, the planetary hours are every bit as real as planetary days of the week. And it's debatable which is more important. Now, these days, a lot of astrologers, and I would say most likely most of them, do not work with planetary hours or planetary days. It sounds too outre to them. It sounds like something that's too fantastic that they don't want to believe in. You know, they have that pragmatic, down to earth. They want to deal with the zodiac and the planets you can see and such like that, and they consider people like mystics to be kooks or something. My experience is that the influence of the planetary day is stronger than the planetary hour. At one time, I had a friend who was very sensitive to this. And this friend could tell you when a planetary hour changed from one hour to the next, and he could tell you which one it was just from his sensitivity without having to consult planetary hour tables. And he had that same feeling that the planetary day was more important than the planetary hour. All based on sensitivity and, working with it, I guess. Now, as has been said several times in these talks, including this talk, determining astrological influence at any given moment is a matter of blending. And the blending is applicable to planetary days and planetary hours. Like, take for example, if you're in a sun hour, and that would be bright and regal and things like that. But if it's on a Saturn day, it is not going to be the same as it would be on a Sunday. And so if you're working with planetary hours, you want to keep the day and the hour in mind, and from that you get a blending of the feeling. Now, these things are really handy if you don't have an ephemeris, or you can't judge all of the things that are happening in the heavens at any given moment with an ephemeris. If you have a table of planetary hours and a wristwatch, you can get a bead and find something useful. If you're trying to talk somebody into something, you will want to do it on a Mercury hour. it's more likely to be successful. If you have a combination of a Jupiter day and a Venus hour, you have something that's extremely positive. And if you're looking for an open reception or social acceptance or something like that, you're much more likely to be successful on an hour like that. If you're doing something deep and something that requires pondering and being very careful, a Saturn hour on a Saturn night hour on a Saturn day would be the best that you could do, because the night hours have a different quality from the day hours. Which is more important, planetary days and hours, or the influence of planets in the sky? Hard to tell. You can only tell it from experience and how good your data is, which means how good your sensitivity is. We're dealing with something that's real, but we're dealing with something that is at the fringes of human sensitivity. We as humans right now are pretty dull, and we're not sensitive to a lot of things. I had a friend once who used to be so sensitive that if somebody was sitting in a chair and got up, and he went and sat in that chair, he could tell you what the person was thinking. Because he had that kind of sensitivity. So what we're trying to say is that this is not, this kind of information, it requires probably more sensitivity than most people have. But even in simple ways, it works and it's helpful. Now, if any of you are interested in trying this out or applying it in life, taking it on faith and trying it in life, I am willing to make copies using a copy machine of tables of planetary hours. It amounts to maybe 20 pages or something like that. If you're interested, you know the email 99fots@gmail.com, and just send in and say, yes, make me some planetary hour tables, and I'll send them to you. Probably I'll have to make them into a PDF or something like that. All right. You can buy them in bookstores. Llewellyn George Publications used to make a very nice book of tables of planetary hours, and it took other things into consideration. It was really quite nice. Simplified Scientific Astrology by Max Heindel has the planetary hours in them also. All right, if you do this, please use good judgment. It's my experience is that good judgment, and after applying something for a number of years, it helps you to get the best that you can out of little things like this. All right. Now, a few minutes ago, we said that the planetary day sequence, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, is more important than the Chaldean or Ptolemaic order, Sun, Venus, Mercury, Moon, Saturn, Jupiter, Mars, which is used more for mundane and historical use. There is one thing that for mundane use that is much more important. One exception. The reason is the planetary day sequence is so important is that it is applicable macrocosmically, whereas the Chaldean or Ptolemaic order is not applicable macrocosmically. Now I'll try to explain what that is. Expansion. Does either of these sequences apply to expansions in sectors of time? For example, are there planetary weeks in the same way there are planetary days? Now, it's true that there are differences between one week and another, but I have never found that they are based on the days of the week sequence or cycle. Not at all. They're probably, the thing I find most is that they're based on the phase of the moon. Are there planetary months? Yes, but they are not based on the days of the week sequence. They're based on the ruler of the sign that the sun is in during the course of the month. So you have your calendar set according to the signs of the zodiac rather than January, February, March. So the planet, so right now the sun is in Capricorn, and the ruler of Capricorn is Saturn. So from the first degree of Capricorn to the last degree, that month is a Saturn month. Now, are there yeah. Are there planetary years? And do those planetary years follow the days of the week sequence? The answer from astrologers, most of them other than me, is yes. And the rulers of the changes of the years follow the days of the week sequence. Now, I don't keep in touch with that. I have a hard time telling the tone of one year from another and separating it from what is happening in the other kind of astrology. I can't even tell you what this year, who the ruler is of this year. I don't feel bad about that because there's too much to be in touch with. I have friends that think a lot about given years, and they cared about things like that. I don't have anybody in my life right now that does that. Other things in my horoscope are more important than thinking about planetary years. Again, we're going to mention something that is all important in astrology. When you decide what you're going to study, you want to understand the relative significance of it. You want to work with the things that are appropriate and that have the most relative significance. Otherwise, you find yourself way out in left field. If you like, I can find you tables of planetary years so that you can, if you want to do a historical search and see whether 1942 was a good year or not, you can do that. I'll try to look them up if anybody wants them. I have several such tables, and the good thing is that the different tables agree with each other about what the years are. I have never worked out the formula for determining the planetary years, other than that it follows, roughly follows the days of the week cycle. Now we're in minutia. I have run into 36-year cycles, and those 36-year cycles were a sector of 36 years follows the next one follows is the next in the days of the week, in the days of the week sequence. And the tables are from a source that I think extremely highly of, but I have never been able to check them out. I don't have the kind of consciousness that can hold the first 36 years of my life relative to the next 36 years of life without taking in the aging process and the maturation process and things like that. I do think it's viable. I think that the 36-year periods most likely have a night and day quality. That one 36-year period is extremely positive, and the other one is more receptive rather than positively assertive. And I say that because two 36-year cycles equal 72 years, and 72 years is how long it takes for the precession of the equinox to go through 1 degree of the zodiac. This would be like the day in the precessional cycle for each degree of the zodiac. That's all fine, a lot of speculation, something interesting. Now, there are other sectors in history that follow these sequences. However, some of them are pretty far-fetched. Some of them go up into the millions of years. Now, I came across what appears to be one of my own, a 200 and some year period, where the sectors are 200 and some years. And I did this when I was doing a brief study of the history of occultism since the time of Christ. And this sequence was most clear in the late 11th century. Because in the late 11th century, you have an event when Hudipayans formed the Knights Templars. And the Knights Templars tried to discourage the Crusaders, but the Crusaders wanted blood, I guess. And they guided the Crusaders so that they could do what they did with the least amount of danger, and the leaders didn't listen to the Templars. But at any rate, that was a Mars Day. Mars ruling knights in combat and things like that. We're going to wipe them out. This was succeeded by a Wednesday. And a Wednesday is a Mercury day. And another name for Mercury is Hermes. So this was a period of Hermeticism. Mercury rules Virgo, and Virgo is one of the planets most associated with alchemy. So the 200 years succeeding the period of Mars were mercurial. After that was a Thursday, a Jupiter's day. And Jupiter rules rapid expansion. And rapid expansion at the same time that the influence of the Aquarian age was coming in brought in a Uranian quality. And that 200 years was the year of revolutions. And most of those revolutions, including the Chinese Revolution in the cities, were fomented by Freemasons. And Freemasons, with all of their pomp and circumstance, are ruled by Jupiter. So all of the American Revolution, the French Revolution, all of those revolutions were ruled by Jupiter. And as time progressed, the Russian Revolution was the Iranian influence became stronger, and they became more left-oriented resolutions. This means that right now, I don't know the exact number of years, right now we are on the cusp of a Friday, 200 years of Venus influence, 200 years of Venus-Uranus influence, with Uranus becoming stronger. And I don't know exactly when that begins, but I suspect that it has something to do that the consciousness of people is going to be introduced to altruism. not as a political system, but as something of feeling, something of love. And creation and arts are going to take a leading role. In fact, I have a very strange idea about that, which I don't think I should offer in public because it's quite wild. It has to do with the use of the voice. The throat is ruled by Venus, and the voice box itself is ruled by Mercury. But I think I'll just pass on that. All right. So we see, now, the big question about all of this is, how do these cycles, days of the week cycles, which are based on cosmogony, how do they fit into the physical cycles, like the orbits of the planets? Mercury every 88 days, or Earth every 365 and a quarter. How do they fit together? What I've given here is a practical use that is made from observation, but there has to be some kind of understanding about how they get together, and that is a matter that is kept very greatly in secret. It's kept in secret by esoteric orders because that knowledge could be used for slanting history in a very unhealthy way, sort of in the kind of thing that brought about the last destruction of Atlantis, of the three destructions. The last, a minor one, that was the Mid-Atlantic Ridge when it went down. But even the reasons for secrecy, Madame Blavatsky, for example, claims that the reasons for secrecy about figuring how the cosmogony fits together with the solar system, they're so secret that you can't even give the reasons for secrecy. It's something that a lot of people have worked on. Rudolf Steiner at one time gave hints about how it could be done, and he gave hints, and a mathematician, astronomer in England spent his entire life trying to work out those hints and was never able to do so. Sufficient unto the day is what we have available to us now. I hope that in this talk that I've given you something that you can use practically, and something that will help you in your application of astrology to life, and that you can help yourself and especially help others, because this is something really simple with just a table of planetary hours and planetary days. You can do nice things, and you can make life easier and better for yourself and others, and that's what we're all trying to do, serve and help each other. We will carry on from here. We're not done with this yet. We're just entering into a new phase of this, and we'll talk about that more the next time we get together next month. Thank you very much.